One of the worst things about the Nintendo Switch is the fact that it's loaded out the ass with ports of older games from other consoles, but you know what, that's actually one of the best things about the console as well. I mean, sure, it'd definitely been a lot cooler if Nintendo, and especially all these third parties, would give us original content rather than rehashing old games that people have already played, but on the other hand, it is nice to have portable versions of some of the greatest games ever made, and even though some of us have already played some of these games, almost none of us have played all of them, and even though these games don't get the same hype and YouTube coverage a new game gets, the fact remains that if you haven't played a game, then it's new to you, so if you've missed more than a handful of these older games being resurrected on Nintendo's little hybrid that could, then the Switch has got a lot more to offer you than it does a lot of other people. However, with there being so many ports and remasters to choose from, it can certainly be overwhelming to choose a place to start, which is why I've decided out of the kindness of my ass to find the 11 best ports and remasters on the Nintendo Switch. But when I'm saying ports and remasters, I'm not referring to multiplats from the current generation, nor am I going to include entire compilations, since that's kind of an entirely different video altogether, although that's not to say that a singular game within a compilation can't have its own spot on the list. And lastly, this list isn't going to take anything into consideration whatsoever other than how good the games truly are, as opposed to factoring in how much they cost, how old they are, and how much they've been updated. So basically, just pretend that none of these ports ever existed before the Nintendo Switch. And with all that being said, make sure to sit back in your Uncle Lonnie's favorite cushion, press the subscribe button if you haven't already, and allow me, the world's greatest cell phone provider, CameronAllOneWord, to tell you the 11 best ports and remasters on the Nintendo Switch. Number 11, Catherine Full Body. Alright, so admittedly, I might just be putting this game on here because it's fresh in my mind since I just got done playing it recently, but I'd be lying if I said that I didn't absolutely love this game. It's basically an M-rated version of the puzzle game Pushmo, filled with spicy cutscenes and social simulation elements thrown in for good measure, and the reason why I love it so much is because there's really no other game out there that offers an overall package quite like this one. And seeing as how there's never really a right or wrong way to solve puzzles, along with the fact that there's 13 different endings with a relatively short playtime that makes seeing them all something you might actually want to do someday, I couldn't leave this game off the list and be able to sleep peacefully afterwards, despite the fact that there's a pretty good chance that most of you would probably hate this game given how weird it is. Number 10, South Park and the Stick of Truth. Okay, so while I'm sure the Fractured Butthole is probably the better game of the two, the fact is that that's from the current generation, and besides, I still haven't even gotten around to playing that yet anyway. But regardless of how much better the second game may be, The Stick of Truth is still probably the funniest game I've ever played, and there's even some pretty solid RPG elements too. If you're somehow not a fan of South Park, then you're probably not going to care about this game one bit, but if you are a fan, then I promise you that you're absolutely going to love this game based on all the callbacks and Easter eggs alone. And since Trey Parker and Matt Stone worked really close with the developers on this game by providing voiceovers and writing all the dialogue themselves, it basically feels like you're playing an episode of South Park, which is really all you could ever ask for with a licensed game. Number 9, Tokyo Mirage Sessions. Alright, so I know that hardcore JRPG fans aren't particularly fond of the Shin Megami Tensei Fire Emblem crossover, but I don't care what anyone says, I had a blast with this game myself. It's basically a Persona game without any of the social elements, where you try to save the world by becoming famous teen idols and battling demons in an alternate dimension, with Fire Emblem characters acting as the personas. I know it doesn't really make any sense, but the graphics and sound are just plain nice, and while the gameplay is a little bit simplified compared to other RPGs, I think it's a jolly good time for anyone who's looking for something a little different. Number 8, Okami. I know this game's been released like 8 billion times, but like I said, that doesn't matter for this list. And besides, despite how many consoles this game's appeared on, it's still pretty damn overlooked if you ask me. Like, I'm sure everyone's probably heard of it, but if you've never played it yourself, it's basically a Zelda clone made by Capcom with assloads of traditional Japanese elements and style tossed into the mix. If I'm being completely honest, I don't think it's as good as most Zelda games, but it's still different enough to where it's definitely worth checking out if you're starting to get tired of Bato after 800 hours. Number 7, Resident Evil 4. Much like Okami, this game's been on pretty much everything ever, but I don't blame Capcom for porting it so many times one bit, because no matter how old this game gets, it's always going to be fun to play, which is why I really don't think it needs a remake. Unlike with movies, video games usually get better with sequels, but for whatever reason, Resident Evil's soft reboot into the action genre peaked on its first attempt, and it never quite reached the same heights after that. I'm sure a lot of different people have reasons as to why it never did, but if you ask me, and if you clicked on this video, then you kinda did, then I'd say that the reason why Resident Evil 4 is the best action game in the series is because it still hadn't quite strayed too far away from the horror-based elements, even though I don't find anything about the game to be scary whatsoever outside of the chainsaw guys. At any rate though, Resident Evil 4 has been ported out the ass because it's one of the best games ever made, and I dare say that it'll still be fun in 100 years, so if you haven't played it yet, then quit being a jabroni and get to it. Well, actually, the game's kind of expensive right now, so you know what, we'll wait till it's like $10, because I'm sure it will be at some point. Number 6, Shovel Knight. Just because Shovel Knight's an indie 2D platformer doesn't mean that it's not damn near perfect. To be honest, I'm not really sure if we should count all the content in Treasure Trove, seeing as how most of that's from the current generation, but even just the base Shovel Knight experience is worth making the cut for this list. Unlike most modern indie games that use the 8-bit graphical style as an excuse to be lazy and cut corners, Shovel Knight truly was going for a specific graphical style on purpose to try to capture the feel of blending elements from all the best side-scrollers on the NES and fine-tuning it to perfection. But you know what, I'm sure y'all probably already know that, so let's move on to number 5. Katamari Damacy. This game's pretty friggin' weird, and if I'm being honest, it's kinda hard to describe why it's so fun without driving you off. It's pretty much a 3D puzzle game where you start off as a small ball that makes anything smaller than it stick to its surface, and you basically need to absorb all your wacky surroundings and make progress. And to add a cherry on top, the music and atmosphere make this as extraordinarily relaxing as it is fun. And it's also pretty incredible that this game turned out as great as it did given how low the budget for it was at the time. Number 4. Bayonetta II. The first Bayonetta was an absolute classic, but for some reason, Platinum Games damn near went out of business, but thankfully Nintendo swooped in and paid them to make a sequel as an exclusive to the Wii U. However, the problem with that is that as we all know, only like 4 people ever owned a Wii U, but fortunately, this game was able to get a second run on the Switch, which is when the world truly discovered how much of an improvement it was over the original. To be honest, I still haven't gotten around to finish playing this game myself, because I was one of those dopes who actually bought a Wii U, but getting my greasy paws on a Switch version of this game is pretty high on my to-do list, because quite frankly, I like addicting action shooters and babes. Just don't tell my wife Chili I said that, because boy does she hate action shooters. Number 3. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. This game originally only cost $50 and then dropped down to $20 not too long after that, but once it came to the Switch, Nintendo charged $60 and took it off the Wii U's eShop. So honestly, I can understand why some people might have a sour taste towards this game, seeing as how Funky Kong certainly wasn't worth an extra $10. But if we're judging the game for what it is, then I honestly think it's one of the greatest 2D platformers ever made, just as long as I can forget about any nostalgia I might have towards the original Donkey Kong Country 2. But you know what, seeing as how Dixie Kong finally returned to the franchise, even nostalgia makes Tropical Freeze even better, and so does Grant Kirkhope returning to make the music for that matter. Obviously, the gameplay is pretty simplistic, since at the end of the day, it is still a 2D platformer, but all the collectibles hidden throughout the levels give this game a lot of replayability, and it's also loaded with assloads of sections that just make you say wow. So if you can manage to forget Nintendo shadiness behind this game, then you should definitely consider picking it up, at least whenever the price drops. Number 2. Xenoblade Chronicles HD. Japanese Wii owners might have been able to experience this game, but for the rest of the world, it was a bit difficult to get a hold of, especially in North America, since GameStop were being greedy little buttholes and opening sealed copies of the game so they could resell it at the eBay price of $80 to $100. And you know what, that's a real shame, because this is probably one of the most notable games on the Wii. The series eventually did manage to find popularity outside of Japan though, so thankfully, the first game in the series now has a readily available definitive version on Nintendo's little hybrid that could. If you're a fan of action JRPGs, then you probably already know all about this game, and if you're not a fan, then there's really no point in me explaining this game to you, since you're probably not going to pay attention to me anyway. But you know what, if you're open to learning how to play a game that in my opinion has a bit of a steep learning curve, then you're definitely going to be busy for quite a while with a story and gameplay that are so great that even bad voice acting won't be able to ruin the experience for you. Number 1. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Alright, so I know people are gonna have a pretty hard time forgetting that this one's a port, because unlike the rest of the Wii U's library, this is one game that people actually played. But if you can find the strength to do just that, then I don't see how you could say that this isn't anything but the greatest Mario Kart game of all time, unless of course you're attached to the uniqueness of Double Dash or the slippery controls of the original game. I mean, Mario Kart 8's got more tracks than ever, most of the best tracks from all the previous games, the best controls in the series, blue shells that are less frequent than they were in the last few games, and all the DLC from the original game on the Wii U with the characters and tracks from outside franchises like Zelda and Animal Crossing were included as well. So if you can get over the fact that this is a port of a game from a console that nobody's ever owned before, and if you can dispel any nostalgia you might have for the older games, then I personally think that this is one of the greatest video games of all time, period, let alone in the Mario Kart series. I'm sure some people are probably TPing the comments section right now, since I probably left a lot of great games off this list, but even though I encourage any comments at all, just keep in mind that there's still tons of ports that even I haven't gotten around to playing yet, but regardless of how you feel about my list, let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody at some point. But let me tell you, if there's 2 people who make excellent Nintendo Switch ports themselves, then it would definitely be today's patrons of the day, JT Murdoch and John Polish Impossible to Say. If you want to be badasses like these 2, then consider supporting FU Game Crew on Patreon for loot boxes and silly rewards in the mail. Send pictures or videos of you rocking merch if you want to make cameos in my videos, and follow me on Twitch if you ever want to hang out whenever I play video games sometimes. My name's CameronAllOneWord, and I'll see you next time.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.